You know that sinking feeling when you can sense disaster coming, but everyone around you thinks you're just being paranoid? That's exactly where my story begins. I'm Sarah Martinez, and I've been a nurse at Chicago General Hospital for 22 years. I've seen enough overdoses, assaults, and accidents to know trouble when I smell it brewing. And that Friday evening in November, trouble had my 18-year-old son Marcus's name written all over it. The rain was hammering against our apartment windows in Lincoln Park when Marcus walked into the kitchen, dressed in his best clothes. Designer jeans I knew cost more than he should be spending, a crisp white shirt, and cologne that could probably be smelled from Michigan Avenue. "Where are you headed all dressed up?" I asked, though something in my gut already knew I wouldn't like the answer. "Just hanging out with the guys, Mom. Nothing crazy." He avoided my eyes, focusing instead on his reflection in the microwave door. "Marcus?" I used that tone every mother perfects, the one that says don't even think about lying to me. "Try again." He sighed dramatically, running his hand over his freshly cut hair. "Fine. We're going to this new club downtown. Eclipse. It's supposed to be amazing." My blood ran cold. Eclipse. I'd heard that name whispered in hushed conversations at the hospital. 3 overdoses in the past month. All teenagers. All from the same place. The police were investigating, but nothing concrete had surfaced yet. Absolutely not. The words came out sharper than I intended. "That place is dangerous, Marcus. I've seen kids come through the ER. Mom, come on." He turned to face me, frustration evident in his dark eyes. "You can't keep treating me like I'm 12. I'm 18 now. I can make my own decisions. Not when those decisions could get you killed." I moved closer, trying to make him understand. "Marcus, I'm serious about this. There's something wrong with that place. The kids I've treated, they weren't just drunk or high. Something else happened to them. But I could see in his expression that stubborn streak he'd inherited from his father. The same determination that had gotten him through high school despite all our financial struggles was now working against me. "You're being paranoid," he said, grabbing his keys from the counter. "I'll be fine. I'll text you, okay? Marcus, please." I caught his arm as he headed for the door. "If you won't listen to me as your mother, then listen to me as a nurse. I've seen things that would make you think twice about going to places like that." He paused for just a moment, and I thought maybe I'd gotten through to him, but then he gently pulled away from my grip. "I'll be careful, Mom. I promise." And just like that, he was gone, leaving me standing in our kitchen with nothing but the sound of rain and a mother's worst fears for company. I tried calling his friends, Jake, Devin, even that kid Tommy whose mother I'd met at parent-teacher conferences, but they were all getting ready, or already out. The solidarity of teenage rebellion. By 10 p.m., I was pacing our small living room, my phone clutched in my hand. Marcus had texted once. At the club, all good, but something felt wrong. 22 years of nursing had taught me to trust my instincts. And right now, every instinct I had was screaming that my son was in danger. The rain had stopped, but the city felt electric with tension. I stood at our window, looking down at the streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement, and made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to sit here and wait for a phone call from the hospital. Sometimes a mother's intuition is the only early warning system that matters. And mine was blaring like a fire alarm. I grabbed my coat and car keys, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the lock. The drive to downtown Chicago felt like it took forever, even though it was barely 20 minutes. Every red light felt like an eternity. Every slow-moving car like a personal obstacle placed there to keep me from my son. Eclipse was located in the River North District, tucked between high-end restaurants and trendy boutiques. From the outside, it looked innocuous enough. Sleek black facade, neon signs, the usual crowd of young people lined up behind velvet ropes. But I'd learned long ago that appearances could be deceiving. I parked across the street and tried calling Marcus again. Straight to voicemail. That wasn't like him. He always kept his phone charged and answered my calls, even when he was annoyed with me. The bouncer at the front door was built like a linebacker, his arms crossed as he checked IDs. I approached him with the confidence that only comes from years of dealing with difficult people in high-stress situations. "Excuse me," I said, pulling out my phone to show him Marcus's picture. "I'm looking for my son. He came here tonight with some friends." The bouncer barely glanced at the photo. "Lady, we get hundreds of kids in here every night. Can't help you. Please," I pressed. "I'm a nurse at Chicago General. There have been incidents." His expression hardened. "You need to step back, ma'am. You're not getting in without ID showing you're 21, and you're definitely not getting in to cause trouble." I felt my frustration mounting, but arguing with him wasn't going to help Marcus. I needed a different approach. Walking around the block, I found what I was looking for, a service entrance on the side of the building. Years of working in hospitals had taught me that there's always another way in if you know where to look. The alley was dimly lit and smelled of garbage and stale beer, but the service door was propped open with a crate, probably for the kitchen staff to get some air. I slipped inside, my heart pounding. The contrast between the back of house and the main club was stark. Here it was all concrete floors and harsh fluorescent lighting. I could hear the bass thumping from the main area, feel it vibrating through the walls. I made my way through what looked like a storage area, past cases of liquor and cleaning supplies, until I found a door that led to the main floor. The moment I opened it, I was hit with a wall of sound, flashing lights, and the press of hundreds of bodies. The club was packed beyond what seemed safe. Young people were everywhere, dancing, drinking, laughing. But as I pushed through the crowd, looking for Marcus's familiar face, I started noticing things that made my nurse's training kick into high alert. Some of the kids looked wrong. Not drunk wrong. I'd seen plenty of that. This was different. Their pupils were dilated in a way that suggested something more than alcohol. Their movements were too loose, too uncontrolled, and several of them looked pale, almost sick. I spotted Jake first, Marcus's best friend since middle school. He was near the bar, swaying on his feet, in a way that had nothing to do with the music. "Jake!" I had to shout to be heard over the music. When he turned toward me, I could see immediately that something was very wrong. His eyes were unfocused, and he looked like he was having trouble staying upright. "Mrs. Martinez." His words were slurred, but there was recognition there. "What are you doing here? Where's Marcus?" I grabbed his arm to steady him. His skin felt clammy and too warm. "Marcus. He was..." Jake looked around confused. Something's wrong, Mrs. Martinez. I don't feel good." My training kicked in immediately. This wasn't alcohol poisoning. This was something else entirely. Jake needed medical attention. But first, I had to find my son. "Jake, where did you last see Marcus?" I kept my voice firm but calm, the way I'd learned to speak to patients in crisis. "Upstairs," he managed to say, pointing toward a staircase I hadn't noticed before. "VIP section. He went with some older guys, said they wanted to buy him drinks." My blood turned to ice. Everything I'd feared was happening, and I might already be too late. The VIP section held answers I wasn't prepared for, and my son in a condition that made my worst fears seem optimistic. Getting upstairs proved easier than I'd expected. The security was focused on keeping people out of the main club, not watching for mothers desperate to find their children. The VIP area was smaller, dimmer, with private booths and a different kind of crowd. Older men in expensive suits, young women who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, and scattered throughout. Teenagers who clearly didn't belong. I found Marcus in a corner booth, slumped against the leather seating. He wasn't alone. 2 men in their 40s sat across from him, and there were 3 other young people, all in various states of consciousness. The scene made my stomach turn. "Marcus!" I rushed over, my medical training immediately assessing his condition. His breathing was shallow, his skin was pale and sweaty, and when I lifted his eyelid, his pupils were pinpricks despite the dim lighting. One of the men looked up at me with annoyance. "Hey, lady, this is a private party. You need to leave. I'm his mother, and I'm a nurse." I was already checking Marcus's pulse. Too fast, too weak. "And I'm calling 911 right now." "No, you're not." The second man stood up, and I noticed he was wearing an expensive watch and had the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. Kid came up here on his own, had a few drinks, maybe took something he shouldn't have. That's on him. But as I looked around the booth, I saw small vials, pills scattered on the table, and what looked like a syringe tucked under a napkin. This wasn't kids experimenting. This was something organized, predatory. "Marcus, honey, can you hear me?" I gently shook his shoulder. His eyes fluttered open, but he couldn't seem to focus on my face. "Mom?" His voice was barely a whisper. I can't. It's okay, baby. I'm here now." I turned to face the 2 men, and years of dealing with difficult patients and their families had taught me how to project authority even when I was terrified. "You have 2 choices. You can walk away right now, or you can explain to the police why there are unconscious minors in your booth with what appears to be illegal substances." The first man laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're making a big mistake, lady. You have no idea who you're dealing with." "No," I said, pulling out my phone and showing them that I was already dialing. "You made the big mistake when you decided to drug my son." But before I could complete the call, Marcus suddenly convulsed, his back arching off the seat. I'd seen seizures before, but this was different, more violent, more dangerous. "Help me get him on his side," I commanded the men, but they were already backing away from the booth. Cowards. I managed to position Marcus safely, supporting his head while the seizure ran its course. When it stopped, his breathing was even more labored, and I could see we were running out of time. The other teenagers in the booth were in similar states. One girl looked like she'd stopped breathing altogether. I started CPR on her while trying to keep an eye on Marcus, my mind racing through everything I knew about drug interactions and overdoses. "Security!" one of the men was shouting. "Get this woman out of here." But I wasn't leaving. Not without my son, and not without making sure these other kids got help. When the club's security arrived, I was ready for them. "I'm a licensed nurse, and these children need immediate medical attention. If you try to remove me or interfere with their care, you'll be accessories to whatever happens to them." The lead security guard looked uncertain. He could see the state the kids were in, could probably smell the legal trouble brewing. "Call 911, I told him firmly. "Now, and clear a path for the paramedics." As sirens began to wail in the distance, I held Marcus's hand and whispered to him, "Hold on, baby. Just hold on." But I knew we weren't out of danger yet. Whatever these men had given these kids, it was still in their systems, and the next few hours would determine whether my warning and my race to find him had come in time. What happened next revealed a truth more disturbing than I'd imagined, but also showed me the power of a mother's love and a community's determination to protect its children. The paramedics arrived within minutes, and I worked alongside them as they stabilized Marcus and the other teenagers. My nursing experience proved invaluable. I could communicate their symptoms quickly and accurately, helping the EMTs make critical decisions about treatment. Marcus was loaded into the first ambulance, and I rode with him to Chicago General. Ironic that he ended up in the same ER where I'd spent so many years trying to save other people's children. Dr. Williams, my supervisor and longtime colleague, met us at the door. "Sarah, what happened?" "Drug-facilitated assault," I said grimly as we rushed Marcus into Trauma Bay 3. Multiple victims. Organized operation. They were targeting teenagers specifically. The blood work confirmed my suspicions. A cocktail of drugs designed to incapacitate victims while keeping them conscious enough to appear willing participants. It was sophisticated, expensive, and absolutely terrifying. While Marcus was being treated, Detective Rodriguez from the Chicago PD arrived to take my statement. I told him everything. About the club, the men in the VIP section, the other teenagers, and what I'd observed about the setup. "Mrs. Martinez," he said after I finished, "you probably saved your son's life tonight, and maybe several others. Those men, we're already working on it. Your description, combined with the club's security footage, should give us what we need. This isn't the first report we've had about Eclipse, but it's the first time we've had someone who could give us concrete details about what was happening in that VIP section." Over the next few hours, as Marcus slowly regained consciousness, the full scope of what had been happening became clear. The club had been operating what amounted to a predatory scheme, identifying young people from the suburbs, getting them intoxicated with specialized drugs, and then exploiting them. The two men I'd confronted were part of a larger ring that had been operating for months. When Marcus was finally alert enough to talk, the first thing he said was, "Mom, I'm sorry. You were right." "Shh," I said, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "What matters is that you're safe now. I should have listened to you. When those guys started buying drinks, something felt wrong, but I didn't want to seem uncool." His voice broke. "I was so stupid." "You weren't stupid, honey. You were targeted by people who knew exactly how to manipulate young people. That's not your fault." But I could see the guilt and shame in his eyes, and I knew this experience would stay with him for a long time. The other teenagers from the club were treated and released over the next day. Jake needed IV fluids and monitoring, but he recovered fully. The girl I'd performed CPR on, her name was Alicia, and she was only 17, spent 2 days in intensive care, but ultimately pulled through. 3 weeks later, Detective Rodriguez called to update me on the investigation. The men from the VIP section had been arrested. along with 4 others involved in the operation. They were facing charges of drug trafficking, assault, and conspiracy. The club's management was also under investigation for their role in facilitating the scheme. Your quick thinking and medical knowledge made the difference in this case, Rodriguez told me. Without your testimony and the care you provided to those kids, we might not have been able to build such a strong case. Marcus returned to school after a week at home. The experience had changed him. He was more cautious, more willing to listen to my concerns, but also more aware of the real dangers that existed in the world. One evening, about a month after the incident, he came into the kitchen while I was making dinner. "Mom," he said quietly, "I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up on me, for coming to find me even when I'd been an ass about not listening, for saving my life." I turned to face him, seeing not the rebellious teenager who'd stormed out that Friday night, but a young man who'd learned hard lessons about trust, consequences, and the people who truly had his back. "That's what mothers do," I said simply. "We love you enough to be the bad guy when we have to be." He hugged me then, longer and tighter than he had in years. Sometimes the most important warnings are the ones that seem like overprotection. Sometimes a mother's paranoia is actually a mother's wisdom. And sometimes, the courage to act on your instincts can mean the difference between a story with a happy ending and one that ends in tragedy. My son ignored my warning about the nightclub, but in the end, the love that drove me to race after him proved stronger than his teenage rebellion, and that made all the difference.